They put blood, sweat, and tears into writing their book. They put their book out in the world, and then they often say, and now the work has begun, right? They're doing the tours, they're building the audiences, they're selling the workshops. Maybe this is just a moment for us to turn our understanding of the value of IP on its head.
Welcome back, everybody, to the show. We're here with the co-founders of Astral, Jack Bogdan and Stephanie Pereira. Today, we're going to address some elephants in the room in the AI space, some ethical concerns about content quality and generation, copyright, and a number of other issues that people are talking about on the World Wide Web these days, and probably debunk a few of them along the way. So without further ado, let's get into it. First and foremost, let's talk about the elephant in the room, watering down the internet with junk. There's been some slop buzz lately around AI agents and flooding the web with low quality content and salesy stuff. I just wanted to get your take on AI agents for marketing and sales use, because there's been a lot of buzz lately on that topic and how it potentially isn't good for what the internet should look like.
Let me step back and say where agents can actually be useful and why it's not marketing and sales, right? Ultimately, what an AI agent is going to do is it's going to break down some kind of larger task into steps, and then it's going to go selectively interact in the browser or with some other tool to accomplish that task. Now, there are plenty of entirely mundane, like in your own world tasks that maybe take 10 steps that it would be great if you could click a button and have it just go do all of those things. Publicly shilling or promoting what you're doing in community spaces leads to the death of community spaces on the web, right? So if you're really focused on your brand and how you come off and how you connect with your audience, destroying the spaces that your audience interacts in to connect around the things that they love, maybe not the best application of technology. And I think it really stems from everyone looking for this kind of like easy button, get rich quick opportunity. And I think it's antithetical to the authentic nature of what you're trying to do. I mean, the purpose of why you choose to talk about certain things and where you choose to talk about them and how you frame it is all a reflection of your own values and your brand's values. And that's so fundamental and key to maintaining the baseline of conversation and interaction around different ideas on the internet. And so spinning up a bot to say, hey, I'm trying to grow my user base by this amount and I like this stuff, go destroy subreddits by spamming them with a bunch of slop that is like trying to understand what people are talking about and then just inserting yourself in the conversation. Just play that out, right? So let's just play out that technology at scale. You will unleash thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions in theory of these bots into all the spaces that people communicate online. And in very short order, if people actually deploy that tech, you will be unable to have a conversation on the web without something randomly trying to insert itself into your attention. And this is a real problem, because the problem with these agents now is that they're browser based. So let's say like you were botting something in the past, like social media spam. Oftentimes you can track that because it's coming from some kind of server IP that is associated with other spam activity. And so you can say, oh, hey, look, this is a bad actor. Let's go clear that out. But with these new agents that are running directly in browsers, technically, I could spin up an agent in my browser and say, go off and do something. And it would use my IP, and it has the authenticity of my history on the web to go say, oh, no, this is someone doing something normal. I don't know. It's dangerous. I think one, it's just fundamentally lazy and bad for your brand. Two, it's like completely detrimental to the web. And if we actually roll it out, it's going to kill a lot of what makes the web special. And so don't do it. And it's just this is that double-edged sword with technology, right? Like you have the possibility of what can be done with that tech in such a positive way. And then you have the negative application of it. And I'm just firmly against this as the core application of the agent tech, because it's just going to destroy the way that we all use the internet.
Thank you. Yeah, just for the people listening, could you speak to what we're referring to in terms of the other Astral?
Sure, the other Astral in the room. Yeah, there was another startup that chose the name Astral. Our trademark lawyer sent them a message. But yeah, they're essentially doing this. They're creating from what it looks like, a browser-based agent that you can say, go promote my company and drive more leads and sales. And their example was scanning subreddits and seeing what the conversation was, and then just inserting themselves in that conversation. As somebody who has been building in AI for a couple of years now, and seeing the growth and progress in the models, you have no control in that context when you're just putting it on autopilot or on what it's going to do. So not only are you just breaking the social contract of the web by inserting yourself into all these spaces on autopilot, but then you don't have that fine-tuned, you don't know what it's going to say or how it's going to interact. And especially if you're doing it from an agent perspective at scale and it's just happening across the board, you just have complete uncontrolled shilling of whatever it is you're trying to do. And so not only are you breaking these community spaces, but then you are losing complete control over your brand. I see these things, unfortunately, being put into use by lowest common denominator, pure, for lack of a better word, growth hacker mentality people that are just looking to do stuff quickly and think that popular Twitter threads that get a lot of attention are how things actually get built at scale, and it's just not true. There are certainly some interesting creative tactics that take a lot of strategy and thought that people put into practice to drive the scale and growth of their apps or whatever their business might be, but this is not gonna be one of them, and it's scary, actually, because ultimately, think about, and this is like an existential conversation for the web, but again, play it out. If all public squares are just these marketing bots shilling to each other about different ideas, what even is the purpose of the internet, right? Like, what do people use it for? You're not going to get good information. All these models are just going to continue to be trained on essentially never-ending slop of people shilling in quasi micro targeted ways. Like, yeah, it's not great. I think there's better uses of the tech.
Yeah, I would agree. You bring up an interesting question, and Stephanie, I wonder if you have some thoughts around just it makes me think about like the law of large communities and how there's always going to be 90% that's just meh and doesn't really work, and then maybe 9% that does okay, and then the 1% that's always like the highest quality that bubbles to the top. So I wonder if one of the answers could be quality and trust. We were talking about the other day an example around book transformations and summaries, but I wonder if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. So I'll lead into that by saying that, and you could just, having listened to Jack go on about this a little bit. I had coffee with a friend yesterday who's totally out of the loop on this conversation. Her daughter is in middle school, is like entering into her first group text threads, and was bemoaning it. And I was like, look, the internet as we know it is over. The idea of going on social media and consuming content from the comments is just, it, because of agents, because of bots, because of the algorithm. We've seen, I mean, Meta has already been inserting AIs into groups and into Instagram. Like, it's a thing. And that Jack is 100% right. No one wants to participate in those conversations. I saw a tweet yesterday that was like, oh my God, I just built an agent that comments on LinkedIn posts and it's getting like great engagement and it's really driving sales. This is terrible. And then someone replied and said, that's awesome. Can I get access to the beta? And then the author was like, yeah, sure, let's connect. So it's people, Jack, like your message of don't do it, like people are going to do it. It's going to happen. The internet as we know it is a different world, like starting now and going forward. On the book summary front, I think it's related. So this was triggered by a comment we saw Chris Ye from Blitzscaling make about, he came across a summary of his book, and at first he was like, oh God, and then he was like, actually maybe this is interesting. And I appreciated the sort of the depth of his thinking through his commentary on what does this mean. And the problem is not AI generated book summaries. That's awesome. I'm excited about that. In fact, I'm excited about it because there is a way that I like to read books, and if I can personalize a book summary, if I can break it down in a way that is interesting and specific to the way my brain works, amazing. But am I going to go on YouTube and see 100 different blitzscaling book summaries and choose the right one? Because they're all going to be generic and the same and not interesting. So what this means, if we're saying that the internet commons as we know it is over, I don't know if this is a good thing or a bad thing, but it means, and this is something we've believed at Astral for a long time, people are going to move closer to the experts and voices and brands that they trust. I said this to Chris. I was like, so that means that I'm much more interested in Chris's summary of blitz scaling. And Zach, you pointed this out. It's not just because he's the expert on it, because he has a way that he's taught that content for years now and understands it in a way that is interesting to me personally. It's why I follow him. And so it's not, people are not going to be going on YouTube and looking for the agent generated slop and commentary and conversations. They're going to be going to the experts they trust and joining those communities where maybe 90% of it's going to be not interesting, but you'll still have that expert voice. And if you want to be that 1% that's super leaned in and diving into the threads. I mean, I'm there's a couple Substackers I subscribe to where I'm like in the threads, and that's like the fun place to be. There's some that I just read their Substack. That to me, this feels like the evolution of where we're headed.
Hmm. So relying on the trusted source or author or highest quality version of that content, and then engaging with that community in a very real way. I like that. Well, it kind of leads into our next topic around AI challenges, AI concerns around IP, copyright, and I guess all those are tied to quality control. What can be done to avoid those challenges and overcome those concerns that people have when it comes to the quality of the content, the IP theft, and those copyright concerns that are happening?
On IP theft, I think you'll just continue to see stuff play out in the courts, to be honest. There's all kinds of conversations about how these models were trained and the sources they used for them, and even more information is just coming out all the time. And so I'm sure that you'll see more information on at least the fact that the entirety of the internet and probably all the output of human civilization has already been scraped to produce these models. So without getting into that part of it, looking at the way the technology works today and how it's likely to continue, quality as it pertains to what you get, I think is really in how you break down solving a given problem and understanding what good is supposed to look like, and then taking those component pieces and then making sure that they are all combined together in the pipeline to produce what you're looking to produce. Stepping back, I think most people's interaction with AI is probably with something like ChatGPT or Claude, where they're very familiar with, I can drag in some content here and ask for a change, or I can just ask a question. And ultimately what you're doing is you're interacting with these models at the base level, right? It's whatever you can get in a one message kind of question. And the thing that we see all the time, even from customers that choose to adopt Astral, is that process of iteration going back and forth one at a time. It can take a long time. You can get something really good. And certainly it's probably less time than if you did it all from scratch and had to really go deep. But even then, it still takes time to ultimately get something into a space where you want to produce something of high quality. And so that's core to how we started thinking about solving for Astral, which was, we understand the edges of where these models start to break down and the core fundamental components that you need to combine to get them to produce really high quality material that is directly reflective of whatever underlying source content that you own in your own IP library, into some new format that is really high quality to serve your audience in a new way. And for us, our toolkit for solving that, and again, this is like a never-ending process of iteration, is we've got our workflow engine, which allows us to do things both with AI and not with AI, looking at different data sets and translating them in a way that ultimately leads to a higher quality output. Now, most customers will never need to see behind the curtain on any of that stuff. And for us, we're always looking at new ways to not only put the latest models to work, but then also understand how the capabilities of what these models are fundamentally really good at could change our pipeline. But from just a business owner or a marketer or a creator who's looking to go in and create something that feels really high quality, you should not have to worry about any of that. Like, your experience should be, I'm looking for a tool, right? And I need a tool that's able to do this specific task for me. How can I adopt something that is easy and straightforward, where you don't have to learn what temperature is and set different values and change sliders and change models. I just don't think people care Like, frankly, like I care because I love this stuff, but I don't think the average person cares at all. And I think this is actually why people's experience with AI is so variable and their expectations of what it can do are so variable, is because you haven't necessarily seen a lot of like very specific focused applications of the technology that aren't just like wrappers basically around what the core of chat gpt is, where people are like, well, I can just ask a question and get a response. When you start to get higher, you can get really high quality examples of all kinds of different applications if you break down the problem, understand the elements that drive really high quality in delivering on that problem, and then basically custom build a system to deliver against that. And so that's the way that we have really approached everything at Astral. We've built our own tech so that we're able to be nimble enough to take on new challenges and understand, like, oh, there's a new need from our audience and community. How can we reverse engineer this essentially to make sure that there's the simplest possible input for you as an average just internet user who's trying to get up to speed on all of this AI stuff, but ultimately get really high quality responses. One other thing I just want to note too, because I think it's really important, is our customers are by and large not just taking what Astral does and just posting it. And I think that's really important. I think Astral gets customers to 90, 95%, but we're all human. And there's always something that you would have said a little differently or framed a little differently. And if we can get you from 0 to 90, 95%, and then the only time you're spending is really doing that copy editing pass and being like, I wouldn't really frame it this way. I want to tweak this or move this up. That's a big win, right? As long as the core fundamentals and the unbroken trust at Astral is this is from the material that you brought into Astral, and we're looking at that, and it's is in the format that you're looking for because you've defined what you're looking for with your brand, or you've picked a template from one of Astral's out of the box templates and you put that to work. But ultimately, this isn't, certainly there are some times where we've heard directly from people that they're really excited. There's one that comes to mind actually. Someone had an email interview where somebody was asking them questions and they had already adopted Astral. They had loaded all of their material into Astral. And so they just fed the interview questions into Astral and then generated their responses. And they were like, this actually answered as I would. And in some cases, maybe more eloquently. I'm like, that's awesome. But by and large, we want people to have that level of autonomy and the human touch. And so Astral, we have very clear guidelines of where we start and end. And we're not just auto posting for people. That's not really where we are. We really are for you to then take your creative view and approach and then put it where you need to for your audience.
Interesting. Like that. We were talking about something the other day around the IP thing. And I follow a lot of artists, and I know you guys are immersed with a lot of authors and creators for many years. And there's obviously this concern about like, oh, the chat GPT is just trained on stealing artists' work, and all the Gen AI tools, especially the visual ones, are just like ripping off people's IP without attribution. I was wondering if you could speak to the flip side of that. How do we keep creatives in the loop and give them a share of that AI boom?
Well, it's interesting. I think similar to the way that streaming music changed the music industry, where there was the way we do licensing just had to dramatically change, right? Where like you're giving like blankets, play as much as you like to Spotify and people will pay $9.99 a month will be how they access the music. And then there's other ways that we continue to generate revenue as an industry. So similarly, I think something we spend a lot of time thinking about and talking to people about is that concept of AI in the loop, where you as a human being should be and could be spending so much of your time instead of chasing down copyright infringement or like understanding that your content is really like a doorway or an access point for people, a way for people to get hooked in and interested in who you are and what you stand for. But then actually, I heard it from the creator of the community Space Mighty Networks. They have a phrase called people magic, and they say we're all in on people magic. And I love that. I love that idea, whether you are someone who wants to stand up and create a community space, which is a ton of work and maybe not for everyone, or you just want to spend more time being able to talk directly to your customers, your audience, the people who you care most about. You can do that. You can free yourself up if you're recognizing that content is and oh my God, I can't believe I'm about to say this, but if you think of your content as almost like top of funnel, where it's like your expertise is not represented solely in the words that you've probably put a lot of energy putting pen to paper, but that is not the end of the story. And I think I know lots of authors, and they all say that they put blood, sweat, and tears into writing their book. They put their book out in the world, and then they often say, and now the work has begun, right? They're doing the tours, they're building the audiences, they're selling the workshops, they're going from there. Maybe this is just a moment for us to turn our understanding of the value of IP on its head.
How do we empower people to just get more out of that IP and make sure they're always having control over it?
Okay, I got 2 answers for you. One is going back to the brand stuff that we already discussed. So it's owning your brand, owning your voice, owning the audience of folks that you build who are super excited about what you have to say. Some of our customers like Dan Harris or Gretchen Rubin are great examples of this. I remember when we first connected with Gretchen's team, Gretchen's CEO and the CEO for Gretchen's company, Anne, said there is a core group of Gretchen fans who, if Gretchen were to have a cruise, they would show up and go on the cruise. They just believe in her and love her to that extent. And we've seen that with Dan as well. He does AMAs and hundreds of people turn up just to hear him riff really and answer their questions and be him, show up as himself in his very vulnerable, very real human flawed way and say like, I'm here with you and sharing space with you. So if you think of it that way, if that's where the value lies in that human connection and that immediacy and that liveness, then all the other stuff it's different, right? It doesn't matter. It means what's happening asynchronously. How are people accessing you and your wealth of knowledge? It's peripheral to the you. Um, that's one way of thinking of it. The other way of thinking of it is this is the nerdy way, and this is with my background in blockchain. I've been talking to some folks about this where I feel like blockchain will finally have its moment with AI and the licensing conversation. What does ownership look like? How do people retain ownership of their IP? We were all just looking at a report about where jobs are growing and where they're shrinking over the next year and in the rest of this decade. And cybersecurity is a big piece of it and understanding how we control and maintain ownership to our assets. I've talked to a bunch of lawyers about this and, their eyes on thinking about blockchain, which is crazy and weird to bring up, but I think is real. So that's my nerdy out there answer to the question.
Hmm. I'd love to dig into that in another episode because that just opened up a can of worms in my head. I think we have time for one more topic. Another concern about AI that I know you guys have some background in solving: misinformation, and how do we safeguard against that? I think a lot of people are concerned about the LLMs making stuff up and like how trustworthy is this information, especially as we get into how that spreads like wildfire across the internet. Yeah, how do we safeguard against AI hallucinations?
Source data, like your material, like whatever it is that you've already done is really like the starting point. If you, again, if you go to ChatGPT or Claude and you ask a question, what you're doing is you're really asking a question of a model that is looking at the entire history of human written civilization baked into that model. And I'll say it's early days around a lot of this stuff, but there are technologies in place like retrieval augmented generation with RAG, if you've heard of it. It's essentially how can you look at a subset of material and focus your task or energy on that material. Now, again, there's ways to open the door to then introduce hallucinations in an environment like that. But the key is to focus again, your workflows around how you're working with that information to stay focused on how it's looking at that raw material and translating it into something new or different. And so at Astral, like every person that creates an account, when you add stuff to your library, you're creating this knowledge space around your information. And we're basically pulling from that when let's say remix from a specific source or a group of sources or from a topic search, right? What we're doing is we're actually saying, okay, great. Zach, you want to create a new LinkedIn post about how, let's say, course creators can put Astral to work. We have material in our library with examples of how course creators have used Astral. And so when you use the topic search that says, I'm looking for course creators, how they use content creation or how they approach content creation, how they interact around lesson plans and engaging with their audience, what it's doing is it's not looking at the web. What it's doing is it's looking at your knowledge space, your content library, and it's saying, give me all the references that we have in this space about that topic. And then let's take that information and then let's apply it into a LinkedIn post, into a worksheet, into et cetera. The key is to anchor it really around information. And this is true across the board. You're seeing it in enterprise, all of the best, I think, use cases of AI when you're seeing them done right at scale. Like anytime you hear about AI for lawyers, AI for accountants, what they're really doing is they're looking at a very specific focused subset of material to drive whatever it is that they're trying to do in the end. So that's really key. And frankly, the models, the base models will also get better at this over time. I don't know if it's ever a permanently solvable problem. Certainly there are many, some people think it's never solvable. Some people think that it's completely solvable. We won't really know for, I think, a few years, but there are tactics and strategies that will only get better. And I think the key that everyone can really understand is you anchor it around information that's trustworthy. And if you do that, then you can really apply it in a bunch of focused ways.
Very cool. Thank you. I guess just one question for each of you to wrap up. We've talked about 4 or 5 different AI concerns. What have you learned in the last year of building Astral that really surprised you when it comes to these AI challenges?
Honestly, I think the biggest surprise is just how difficult it is behind the scenes to drive those really high quality results. I guess it shouldn't necessarily be a surprise, but AI is non-deterministic. It's highly variable. There's a lot of banging your head against the wall a little bit behind the scenes to get something to be repeatable, right? And to drive something that is useful for people that, again, don't have to learn about all the ins and outs of this stuff. And we've certainly found new ways to do that kind of reverse engineer process to get to higher quality material. And I think that the two halves of this are not only how important it is to just have strong human driven analytical skills to do that reverse engineering and breaking down something into its core fundamental parts and then reverse engineering a process around it, but then also the nuance of how to put different models into place to accomplish different tasks. It's very difficult. There's a lot of base human knowledge you're not going to ask an AI for about how these things actually like work in practice. And we're constantly learning because we're constantly seeing updates to the models. But I continue to be surprised by that level of nuance and, frankly, human creativity in how to take that application and put it into practice. So thankfully, our customers don't need to care or worry about that. They can just get the results, but it's really hard. It's quite difficult. It's, again, this isn't just taking one thing and throwing it into ChatGPT in the background and getting a response. It's not that. There's a lot of really hard work to make sure that you are breaking down a problem effectively. So I'm consistently surprised by how hard that is, but how rewarding it is when you crack it. Every time we look to add something into the product, like we're adding a new feature in the next few days around brand voice, an improved brand voice. And I can't tell you how difficult it was to go through and make sure that we can, for people that don't necessarily have a brand voice, infer one from an example piece of material in their library. That seems like it would be easy, but it's quite hard to get it to be in the right format that we can then use to apply elsewhere in the product. We are constantly iterating.
Love it. Thank you. Stephanie, what surprised you in the last year about building an AI?
I mean, I would say same. I think in the early days, a lot of the conversations we were having about as people who've been building and swimming in the technology seas for a long ass time. Um, the fact that the world of zeros and ones has always been so binary and so like predictable, whereas suddenly it's, I don't know, maybe it'll work. We'll build a thing, maybe it'll change. A lot of the conversations have been like the shifting sands of AI. We've talked to companies who've actually chosen not to build because things are continuously shifting and they don't feel like there's a strong foundation to build on top of. And then I think that other piece about what Jack just said about creativity, on one hand, 100% AI is changing the jobs landscape. On the other hand, I know how much of my human brain and thought and critical thinking, and I said something about this to someone recently. My skill as a manager of people, I bring to the table when using AI regularly. I don't think that's changing anytime soon. Even as the models get better and better, I think our full selves, those of us who bring our full selves to our work, don't have anything to worry about when it comes to losing our jobs to AI.
Thank you for the perspective. That's a topic I definitely want to put a pin in for our next episode, the job impact. So I think that's a meaty one that we can unpack with both of you guys. But thank you so much. Really appreciate your insight as always. And I'm really pumped for that brand voice, that new and improved brand voice to come out this week. Awesome. Have a great day.
Thanks. See ya.
Thanks.